A cry woke me. It was still deep night. The moon sailed overhead, the stars steady as candles, and a chill breeze wandered in from the open desert. I raised myself on my elbow, tossing aside blankets and a canvas tarpaulin. All around me, indistinct bundles of sleeping men began to stir. 4 figures moved between me and a red fire, the 2 cooks and the horse wranglers. One of them grumbled that they had gotten in so late they'd better not even try to sleep. I dressed quickly, buckled my buckskin shirt, and dove for the fire. A dozen others were already there. It was bitterly cold, and though the sky in the east had just started to pale, the moon and stars remained bravely shining. A band of coyotes shrieked their desperate blasphemies against the coming day, while the stray herd, awakening, began to bawl and bellow. 2 crater-like Dutch ovens filled with fried beef stood near the fire. 2 buckets brimming with soda biscuits flanked them, and 2 coffee pots stood guard at either end. We each grabbed a tin cup and plate from the chuck wagon, helped ourselves, and squatted on our heels as close to the fire as possible. As we ate, the eastern sky lightened, revealing the mountains under the dawn like silhouettes cut from slate-colored paper. Those to the west faintly glowed. Objects around us became dimly visible. The windmill, the adobe ranch houses, the corrals. Cowboys rose one by one, dropped their plates into the dishpan, and began hunting out their ropes. From the pasture came the shouts of the wranglers, and soon a cloud of dust appeared. The first of the remuda trotted into view with the free grace of unburdened horses, followed by others in procession, those near us sharp and well-defined, those in the background more or less obscured by dust. The leader turned unhesitatingly into the corral, and the rest of the 250 saddle horses poured in behind, thundering with the sound of unceasing hoofs. Instantly, the cook camp was deserted as the cowboys entered the corral. The horses began to circle the enclosure like performers in a circus ring, while the men at the center watched keenly, searching for their mounts. In no time, each cowboy had recognized his choice, and, with his loop trailing, walked toward the edge of the circling horses where his pony dodged. Some whirled their loops, but most cast with a quick flip. In an incredibly short time, each cowboy had his mount, and the others, under the wrangler's guidance, meekly headed out over the plain. We mounted and rode away, just as the mountain peaks to the west caught the rays of a sun we wouldn't enjoy for another half hour. I had 5 horses in my string and rode that CS horse, Brown Jug, a powerful, well-built animal, about 14 hands tall, with a vast enthusiasm for cow work. Feeling good in the frosty morning, he was full of energy. At the gate of the water corral, we split into 2 groups. The smaller, under Jed Parker, was to drive the mesquite in the wide flats. The rest of us, led by Homer, the roundup captain, would sweep the country as far as the foothills near Mount Graham. We spurred our horses into a full gallop. Mile after mile we thundered along, dodging in and out among the mesquite bushes, sometimes sweeping over grassy plains that seemed endless, sometimes skipping and buck-jumping through gullies and barrancas. The air stung our faces as we rode, and the rush stirred our blood, leaving only the tips of our fingers and noses cold. The sun soon shone low and level across the plains, and the shadows of the canyons began to model the flat surfaces of the mountains. Beyond a hill, our party divided again, half to the right and half to the left. We had been riding directly away from camp, but now we circled back, riding a circumference with headquarters as the center. The country was pleasantly rolling and covered with grass. Here and there were clumps of soapweed, and far in the distance lay a slender dark line across the plain which we knew to be mesquite. Once entered, it would seem to spread out vastly. From time to time, Homer halted us and detached a man to ride directly back to camp, driving all cattle before him. Each cowboy remained in sight of his neighbors, forming a dragnet whose meshes contracted as we neared home. I was detached when only the cattleman and Homer remained. They took the outside, the post of honor requiring the hardest riding. Brown Jug and I congratulated ourselves on an exciting morning ahead. Wild cattle know well what a drive means, and they don't intend to get caught if they can help it. But they fear a mounted man and can't run as fast as a horse, which is fortunate for the cattle business. As soon as a band of them spotted us, they curled their tails and took off at a long, easy lope that would leave a domestic cow in awe. We yelled and shrieked to keep them going, to get the cattle started, as they say. But soon a little band of cattle began to veer farther and farther east. When they thought they had an opening, they would turn directly back and make a dash for liberty. The nearest cowboy clapped spurs to his horse and pursued them. It was a pretty race. The cattle ran with long, springy jumps that covered ground faster than it seemed. The cowpony, his nose stretched out, ears slanted, and eyes snapping with the joy of the chase, flew belly to earth. The rider, sitting slightly forward, held the loose seat of a cowboy. Dust rose, swirling behind the flying group, a small speck against the immensity of the desert morning. The cattle held their own at first, but soon the horse began to gain. In a short time he came abreast of the leading animal. The steer stopped short with a snort, dodged back, and set off at right angles to its former course. The pony, in two fierce plunges, stopped dead, doubled like a shot, and took off on the new tack. An unaccustomed rider would have lost his seat here. The second dash was short. With a final shake of the head, the steers turned back toward the ranch. The pony dropped unconcernedly to a shuffling jog. Far away the arc of our cordon stretched out. The most distant rider was a speck, and the cattle ahead of him like maggots with smooth, swift motion. The herd hadn't yet taken form, still too widely scattered. The distant plains crawled with minute creatures moving toward a tiny center. In front of us, the cattle behaved well at first, but then, far down the long, gentle slope, I saw a break for the upper valley. Homer became even smaller as he departed in pursuit. The cattleman moved to cover Homer's territory, and I edged farther to the right. Then another break from another bunch. The cattleman rode at top speed to head them off, disappearing into the distant mesquite. I found myself in sole charge of a front 3 miles long. The nearest cattle were trotting along at a good gait, unaware of the opportunity I knew they would soon see. I tightened my cinch while there was still time. Even as I mounted, Brown Jug's impatience told me the cattle had spotted their chance. I gathered the reins and spoke to the horse. He needed no further direction, setting off at a wide angle to intercept the runaways. Brown Jug was powerful, the spring of his leap like whalebone. The yellow earth streamed past like water. Our pace grew with a thunder of hoofs, and nothing could turn us from our straight line or check the momentum of our rush. My eyes filled with tears from the wind. Saddle strings streamed behind, and Brown Jug's mane whipped my bridle band. Dimly, I was aware of soapweed, saccatone, mesquite flashing by, too fast to dodge. 2 antelope bounded away. Birds rose hastily from the grasses. A sudden chirk, chirk, chirk sounded all around. We were in the center of a prairie dog town, but before I could consider the risks of holes and broken legs, the chirking had fallen behind. Brown Jug had dodged and skipped successfully. We closed in on the cattle, who ran stubbornly, unwilling to turn until the last moment. A deep rage at their obstinacy seized us both. A broad, shallow wash crossed our way, but we plunged through its rocks and boulders, angered at the slight delay. The hard land on the other side greeted us with joy, and Brown Jug extended himself with a snort. Suddenly, a jar shook me to the core. I found myself staring over Brown Jug's head directly down into a deep, precipitous gully. The edge had been hidden by grasses, invisible to my blurred vision, but Brown Jug saw it at the last instant and executed one of the cow pony's miraculous stops. But the cattle had found a passage above and scrambled down and across. Brown Jug and I, at a more sober pace, slid down the almost perpendicular bank and out the other side. A moment later, we had them headed in the right direction. They whirled, and Brown Jug turned after them so sharply that my stirrup brushed the ground. After that, we were masters. We chased the cattle far enough to set them on the proper course, then pulled down to a walk, catching our breath. But another band appeared back on the ground we'd just covered, doubling through toward Mount Graham. A hard run brought them back in line, but more cattle poured out from the hills, crossing everywhere, ahead and behind. Brown Jug and I went to work. Neither Brown Jug nor I spared any effort. We were utterly alone. The cattleman and Homer had vanished, and to our left, the men were fully occupied with marshaling the compact herds that had massed. My opponents were mere outliers. Brown Jug must have run nearly 20 miles with only one check. Then we chased a cow into the dry bed of a stream, where she turned on us savagely. Her horn hit only the leather of my saddle skirts, so we left her behind, knowing a cow on the peck wouldn't be driven further. We had gained little ground, but we succeeded in keeping the cattle from scattering too widely. The sun was now hot, and though Brown Jug still ran gamely, his interest undiminished. He was clearly tiring. We were both relieved to see Homer's gray horse appear in the mesquite. Together, we soon herded the cows into the main group. Strangely, once they joined their fellows, their wildness vanished, and they began plodding toward the ranch. As my horse was winded, I joined the drag at the rear, where the lazy cows, small calves, and the sickly ones lagged. The difficulty now was keeping them from dropping out. We indulged in a variety of cow calls, one cowboy even using an old tin can filled with pebbles as an effective rattle. The dust rose in clouds as we slouched in our saddles, exchanging notes on the brands we'd seen. Our ponies shuffled along, resting but always ready for a dash after a bull calf or yearling with ideas of its own. Thus we passed over the country, down the long, gentle slope to the sink of the valley, whence another long, gentle slope ran to the base of the other ranges. At greater or lesser distances, we caught the dust and made out dimly the masses of the other herds collected by our companions and by the party under Jed Parker. They went forward toward the common center with a slow, ruminative movement, and the dust they raised went with them. Little by little they grew plainer to us, and the home ranch, hitherto merely a brown shimmer in the distance, began to take on definition as the group of buildings, windmills, and corrals we knew. Miniature horsemen could be seen galloping forward to the open white plain where the herd would be held. Then the mesquite enveloped us, and we knew little more, save the anxiety lest we overlook laggards in the brush, until we came out on the edge of that same white plain. Here were more cattle, thousands of them, and billows of dust, and a great bellowing, and slim-mounted figures riding and shouting ahead of the herd. Soon they succeeded in turning the leaders back. These threw into confusion those that followed. In a few moments the cattle had stopped. A cordon of horsemen sat at equal distances, holding them in. "Pretty good haul," said the man next to me. "A good 5,000 head."